Thanks to NV Play's data insights for helping me with this video. They can help any cricket team improve their skills using their advanced technology.
Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 70 of the Footmarks podcast. I'm Behram Qazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jarrod Kimber, who you can find literally everywhere. And the title for this particular Footmarks podcast is Time Travelers Who Could Win a Test Series in India. Now, I remember a week back or something, Jarrod, well, by the time this comes out, a couple of weeks back, you asked everyone in the Good Areas chat about which teams from the past could beat India, this India, at home. And it's a fair question to ask because, India, apart from being damn good on home turf, have an amazing team with all bases covered. They've won, 18 consecutive test series at home now, and winning a test series or test match even in India is probably the toughest task in the sport. And if you look at the team, right, Rohit and Kohli provide experience in the batting and are absolute legends. You've got Jaiswal and Gill, who are the future and, generational talents with the bat. They've got youth and exuberance. Rishabh Pant is back and he's still phenomenal, whereas Ashwin and Jadeja are one of the best spin bowling partnerships of all time. You add Jasprit Bumrah to the mix, who I think is the best all-format cricketer in contemporary cricket. And, Mohammad Siraj is there. Mohammad Shami's injured right now. So all of that.
And you're also talking about this team right now.
Yes.
But before that, they had Rahane and Pujara to pick from. Do you know what I mean? Like, even if you go back recently, Ishant Sharma with one of the best comebacks in the history of mankind, before and after, it's not just like this current 11 or anything that we're talking about. We're talking about a group of, let's say, 15 to 20 players over a period of a couple of years, and now a long time, as you said, 18 consecutive series.
Yeah.
So I think it's so much more than just like right now. It really has been going on for a while.
Absolutely. And it's a unit basically across a span of years which screams invincible on home soil. That's basically what it is. And right now they don't really have any holes in the team, and no other team is really set up to beat them in the current climate.
No, and a lot of this came out of there was a question that we were asked on a live, I think, but a lot of this came out of Bangladesh. Were Bangladesh the team that was best set up to beat them, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose you could go back to Australia, Australia with the two younger spinners and Cameron Green in that lineup. Like they had some stuff that was going on there. But you look at it and it's like, well, all the other Asian teams have gone to shit. Like there was a period of time in this, and you will bring this team up later. There's a period of time during this reign. It would have been really interesting to see Pakistan go up against India, but they don't play them. But if they played them now, they would not win. They would not win a match, right? They might win a toss.
They will not win a session.
they might not win a session, right? Current form, Pakistan. And, Sri Lanka haven't been particularly strong all the way through, although, just of recent times they've started to amp up. Obviously, Bangladesh and Afghanistan are still getting better. But so you don't have an Asian team. And that was the thing that got to me. So when I started to think about Australia and West Indies, the two last major dominant sides, Australia had South Africa there at all times, right? Now, South Africa didn't have a great spinner, but South Africa did pretty well in Australia during the Australia's great run, and certainly at the start of it, was it 94 when South Africa was at 1-1, and when they won the test in Sydney and everything, like they brought some good teams over, and they were eventually the team that beat Australia, right? Like it was most likely going to be South Africa. And then you go to the West Indies. Again, the West Indies had to go up against Australia. Now, they were pretty lucky that probably in the late 70s when Australia was really good, Kerry Packer obviously meant that wasn't possible. So they didn't have to go up against as many good Australian teams for a period of probably about 4 or 5 years, right? And then when they did, Jeff Thompson had done his shoulder. Lilly was starting to age out, so that team was no longer as dominant. So they had to wait a decade, but then the next decade, Australia start to find fast bowlers again. They find a leg spinner. Their batting is incredible, and they beat West Indies. And so you look at it and you just go, well, if Australia had a little bit of luck, they might have been in a good position to do that. But you look at the teams who did push against the West Indies. It was New Zealand and it was Pakistan, and they were probably not really set to go to the West Indies and dominate. Right? They were more set to play them very good on flatter pitches or on greener pitches and tear them up a little bit at times. So the West Indies did have other teams that were set up that could cause them problems. You look at India and you're just like, it's not just, and you can still argue that the West Indies or Australian are better teams than India. I'm not saying that India is a better team than either of those two, but what I am saying is when you look at the map, there isn't a side that you just go, oh, wow, I can't wait for this thing to play India, because you're just like, well, the Australians should do okay, but Australia hasn't done well against India at home. And they've held in away, I would say, compared to maybe England and New Zealand. But they haven't looked good in India. They've just looked like they're holding in and keeping themselves relevant. You know, was it 2016, 2017? That series?
India, since they lost that test series at home to England in 2012, have lost just 4 test matches at home. 2 of them have been Australia and 1 of them is England, right? I can't, for the life of me, remember who the 4th team is.
Did South Africa win one or New Zealand?
Did they? Because 2 for sure are Australia, right? On different tours.
Oh, no. England's won twice, haven't they?
Oh, I guess.
So it'd be England twice. But the thing is, in the series that England won, it ended up being really one-sided. I think the difference is that Australia kind of, like, if you look at that 2017 tour, Australia had a chance to win that series, right?
Yep.
Like they were in a really good position to do that. The last one was a bit messier. I wouldn't say Australia had a chance, but again, it felt like Australia were in those series. Whereas I suppose with England had a chance in the first 2 tests this time, but the last time they won that first test, and then India's spinners came back, and that was the end of the series. So just you look at it and you're like, well, who is the team that's going to go there right at the moment and do well? And then that's where that question sort of comes from of who are the teams in history that would go there and go well? So I got a message today from someone who said, oh, you missed this team. It's in my Twitter, and he was like, it was 1970s England, and the team was Derek Underwood, so a great spinner. The second spinner was Ray Illingworth, who's a bit more of a part-time spinner. That a good batting lineup and good pace, and you're just like, so Derek Underwood. Let's say him and Jadeja count each other out. Ray Illingworth is part-time. Is he going to count out Ashwin if the pitch is spin? And who's the third spinner if Akshar or Kuldeep comes in? Right. True. And that is where it gets really, really tricky. And then, okay, so India decide we're going to beat you with pace. You've got a lot of England seamers. I'm not saying they're bad seamers. How are they going to bowl on those wickets compared to Bumrah?
Yeah.
Right?
Those are all fair questions to ask.
Do you know what I mean? And that's when you start to go, oh, shit, this is not easy at all to find a team throughout history. And, you know, we had the people in Discord, and as you said, the people in our chat as well talking about it. A lot of the more obvious teams, when you drill down on it, it's like, that's a really good team. That's not set up to beat this India team right at the moment.
Yeah, that's the main pain point over here, that there's not a single team in the circuit where you're like, oh, these guys would have a chance. Because England and Australia are literally the cream of the crop when it comes to these tours, and they also struggle big time. And you mentioned how the mighty West Indian team, you know, who, by the way, went unbeaten in a test series at home from 73-74 to 94-95. So that's like 20-21 years. And then Australia had like a 15-year run as well, unbeaten at home. But the difference with this Indian team, and some of this is to do with eras, of course, Jarrod, is that they've got 18 consecutive test series wins, right? Yeah. So they're not drawing any series either, which just goes on to show their dominance. And to your point earlier, maybe the West Indian team was a better one. And of course, that, you know, dynasty lasted for 2 decades. That's not something that the Indian team has achieved. But when it comes to simply winning games of cricket or test matches, this is very, very surreal what India's going through right now.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to have a look at it. And I think it's different than those other two. It's again, so I did a piece about them at home, comparing them to the West Indies and Australia at home. Look, you're right. There are more innings victories, but that was also used by Australia over West Indies. It was like, well, we got more wins. And it's like, yeah, well, in your era, people got more wins. To be fair to Australia, and now to be fair to India, West Indies probably could have pushed for a lot more wins in their period, and they didn't. And you look at it, but cricket maybe wasn't quite at that level to be able to do that. Whereas by the time Australia came in, there was an element of they could have done that.
Before we get into all the fun stuff, I do want to ask you, like, if you had to rank those three sides at home, West Indies, Australia, and India in their, eras, who wins this?
At home,
Yeah.
it's probably Australia or India at home. I think if you're asking me who is the greatest dynasty, it's West Indies, because they did it over 2 generations, and neither of these teams have done it over 2 generations yet.
Yeah.
Like outside of Viv Richards, and even he sort of disappears. There isn't a player who tracks all the way through both generations for the West Indies. So to be able to redo that on the fly, but at home. So the West Indies, I always thought one of the big skills the West Indies had, or one of the big advantages they had, was their wickets are really different at home.
Mm-hmm.
So they, you go to Sabina Park and it's like you're going to get hit in the head, right? Yep. And then you go to Guyana and you're going to get hit in the ankle. And so their players were very good at that. Whereas if you look at India and Australia, they're more standard. These are what Australian wickets are like. Yeah, Sydney and Adelaide are slightly different, but you still get hit a lot with short balls, and the ball still bounces there.
There's not an awful lot of diversity in the playing conditions.
I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. So it would make sense if the answer would be India or Australia. I would probably go with, because then you've got the spinner, don't you? I'd probably go with India because they got 5 bowlers, and Australia only really ever had 4. And I think that's the other thing that's hard to match up with. But yeah, I don't think there's much between those two.
Yeah, fair enough. And you guys can let us know in the comment section how you would rate all 3 of those teams in their dominant home test runs, right? Now, let's come to the fun stuff. And before we actually start to discuss all the different teams that are potential candidates to defeat this Indian team in a test series in their own backyard, I want to talk about the criteria you built up to kind of measure all of these time traveler teams from the past, Jarrod.
Yeah.
And you had 5 different factors. One of them was fast spinners, then flat pitch quicks, batting depth, all-rounders, and a few left-handers, so that Ashwin doesn't just come and gobble them up, right? Batting depth makes sense as well.
I mean, if you go historically, there aren't many teams like that. But if you turn up to India with 5 left-handers in your lineup, you're probably just going to lose, right? You're just not going to win that test series. So you want as few left-handers as possible.
Yeah, so few left-handers. Of course, you would always want all-rounders because that also brings in versatility. Batting depth is key because India have a terrific bowling lineup. Like the fact that they have Bumrah, Ashwin, and Jadeja in the same team, right? That's insane.
So I'll explain exactly why I had all these 5. So the left-handers one we've already done. You can't have more than 2 left-handers because Ashwin's going to kill them. You need an all-rounder because you need 5 bowlers. Right, because they have 5 bowlers, and I don't think you're going to find a better 4 bowlers than they have 5 bowlers for their conditions. The batting depth is obvious, but you are going to lose wickets at one stage. So you cannot be in a situation where your number 6 or your number 7 is weak, right?
I mean, look at Bangladesh. They were batting till 8, and it didn't matter.
Exactly. Flat pitch quicks, of course, that's versus Bumrah. But what I meant by that was, you can take over maybe an Anderson or whatever, but you need other bowlers who can reverse swing it, who can be deadly accurate so people can't hit them away, or who have had success in Asia like Courtney Walsh. And then fast spin is the other one. We've just seen Bangladesh again come over. Their spinners were just a little bit too slow. Right? They didn't have the ability to put the pressure on because Indian batters, I think, the current Indian batters, there's a lot of talk about Indian batters can't play spin anymore, which is absolute bullshit. What we're really saying is Indian batters having a lot of trouble playing on the pitches where the ball is ragging sideways.
Yes. It's a rank turner issue. It's not a India versus spin issue. As
and if you look at the guys who've been successful, like Tom Hartley and like Matt Kuhneman and these sorts of people, they bowl quicker. Whereas the spinners that go over there that are slow, and if you go through history, that's always been the case. These slower spinners in India struggle. You need to bowl just a little bit quicker. And if you look at Kumble and Chandrasekhar, even their wrist spinners, just that little bit quicker than Pakistani wrist spinners or Australian wrist spinners.
Yeah, no, that's fair. All right, let's initiate this exercise then. And I suppose the best place to start is talking about the 3 teams who have actually defeated India in a test series in India in this millennium, right? 2000 onwards. And the first one was South Africa in 2000. It was a good batting team. Most South African teams are, barring the current one, right? But the wickets were divided. I think Pollock had 9, and then Cronje had 6, and Nicky Boye took 7. So I reckon those guys would struggle in 2024 versus this juggernaut of an Indian team.
I can't imagine Hansi Cronje even bowling in India in these. I mean, that's how much cricket has changed. If Hansi Cronje played now, he'd be a specialist batter. Like, he'd give him the ball occasionally when it was swinging, but he isn't bowling in fucking India, is he? Let's be honest. I mean, that's just not how cricket has developed at all. And Nicky Boye as your main spinner. I mean, Jesus. There aren't many cricketers in the world. Actually, I'm pretty bad against left-arm finger spin, but even against that, I reckon I could get through. I reckon I could have snuck through an over of Nicky Boye at times. What was his bowling average in Test cricket overall? But 42, 43? Like
something like that.
Basically a bits and pieces cricketer. There's no way, and I like the all-rounders in that team. I like the seam bowlers in that team. There's absolutely no way that team goes to India now and wins a test.
Yeah, I don't see it either. And then, of course, we come to Australia 2004. Now, this was a team which was absolutely stacked with both bat and ball, right? You've got lots of left-handers, though. And even though Shane Warne bowled better on this Indian tour than he had ever bowled before, because he took, 14 wickets in this series, all 3 games. And even if that is the case, you'd have to kind of consider that they didn't really have a good second spinner. I mean, of course, Michael Clarke had that, game where he took 6 for 9. But Nathan Horitz was not great, or wasn't the ideal partner for Warne. And I mean, look, McGrath and Gillespie were at their peak. They were very, very important for Australia in this series as well. And I'm not saying, like, this team, I think, would still have a fair shot at defeating India. But it's the left-handers thing and the not enough, support for Warne thing as far as spin bowling is concerned. Those are the 2 real things that are bothering me.
Probably the all-rounder as well. Warne has to be great. So, look, this is probably the last series that Gillespie was great, right, with the ball. I can't remember if he had a home series around this point, but he was basically on his last legs. They would have had Brett Lee as a backup. I can't remember if he played any tests in that, but again, a good backup to have.
No, I think Brett Lee was injured for this one. Kasparovich was the other guy. Yeah.
I mean, we're imagining he was fit, but even Kasparovich was an interesting bowler in India at times. Indian fans rate Kasparovich higher than anyone else on earth does. Everyone else on earth is like, Kasparovich, the poor man's Bickle. But Indian fans do really like Kasparovich, and he was a handy bowler. But so let's say, if you don't want Horitz in, then and Horitz was like a fetus at this point as well. Like, he's not even the Horitz that he went on to become.
And if I remember correctly, Jarrod, one of the big issues that Australian selectors had with Nathan Horitz was he just lacked confidence.
And when he was young, I think that was a big part as well. But it caused a bigger issue later on. But you're right. You're definitely right there. I just doesn't quite have the team. I'm not saying he couldn't come to India and win a test, because if they're playing a 4 or 5 test series, I think that level of talent in a team should win a test, right? But you're right, the left-handers and everything else. The other thing that I noticed when I looked at that is that the Indian batters had a unusually poor series, as in none of them made any runs. And I feel we have to give credit to the Australian bowlers in that series, of course. But how many series did we see in that era where the Indian batters didn't make any runs? I think there was an element of, not luck, because that was unfair, but I don't think that's the best Australian team that we can pick to go to India, as we will come up with later. I think there was a better Australian team that could have gone to India.
Yeah, that'll definitely
in that period.
come up.
In that period.
There are a few Australian teams that will be mentioned on this podcast. But before that, let's go to the last team that defeated India in a test series in India, which is England 2012. It's been 12 years now, but this was the series where Swan and Monty just went berserk. They were on a roll. And then Alistair Cook and KP was scoring tons for fun, right? Yeah. Now, that team didn't really have an all-rounder, though, which is interesting because England usually do have all-rounders. But otherwise, I feel like if Swan and Monty did go on another run, they would have a chance.
Yeah, I wonder where Tim Bresden was in his career at that point. Had he just injured himself? Or
had England lost a test match where he was playing yet? because that was a record for the longest time. Remember? Every time Tim Bresnan played for England in a test match, they would win.
Yeah, so it's around that period, isn't it? I didn't go that deep into all the teams because, especially with some of the '60s teams, it got intense, as you saw. So I didn't quite go to that level. But I suppose the question I would have there is, let's say Swan and Monty are really, really good. Let's pick them both at their peak. And I'm a huge fan of Graham Swan, and Monty at his peak was a really good bowler. They're not better than Ashwin and Jadeja at their peak, are they?
Yeah, they're not. Not even close.
And then who's the third spinner or the third seamer? And I think that's where the issue of that team comes in.
Who was partnering Jimmy at that time? Was it Broad? Was he in the team?
Yeah, so Broad was in the team at that point. So what's his 2012? I suppose that wasn't that far removed from guys like Tremlett, Onions. That that's all good cricketers. I don't know how any of the Tremlett would have been an interesting one. Tremlett bowled really well against Indians in general. He would have been a really interesting one in that kind of thing. But I think he'd been pushed to the side a little bit at that point as well. Stephen Finn is the other one who might have even played in that series.
Yeah, I think Finn was the third seamer, I suppose.
I'm not sure he was quite accurate enough in Indian conditions to be. I think it's a good team. If you told me it won a test match, I mean, I think it's a better team than the test team that just went over and won a test match. I'm fine. I can't see any way where it's pushing for a victory in the series, though, unless Swan was even better than we remembered. And also, when they went up against the Indian spinners, they were still developing at that point, right? We're now talking about you taking on the Indian spinners when they're in their prime. And there was also no Bumrah, and the Indian seam wasn't particularly good at that point. So I just find it hard to really get to a point, I think, where I believe that is a legitimate chance, that one. But a lot of people really like that team and calling it. And I don't want to... I really respect that team and what they did, and I don't think they get enough. They've got a documentary made about them, but I don't think they get enough credit. And now they'll never get remembered, right? Because of Baz Ball and everything. But I just want to go to Cook. Cook is phenomenal because he has faced 761 balls of Ashwin in India.
Wow.
And he averages 46.
And he's a left-hander.
That's what I mean. That's why I bring it up. Sorry, because he's a left-hander. Whereas just to compare that to Stokes, who averages 19 against Ashwin in India, right? So, there aren't many left-handers at the top of the list. So Warner averages 28 against Ashwin in India. You go down the list, Al Garrett is 22. Even Chandrapal was only 28 against him. Wow. So when you face Ashwin in India and you take a left-hander, the one left-hander, if I'm taking two left-handers from history, probably the two I would take would be Alistair Cook, and the other one I would take would be perhaps someone like Neil Harvey, who might come up later as well. There aren't too many others. I think even Lara would have struggled a lot with Ashwin because Lara liked the ball to go up out of the hand, and he didn't like the more direct spinners. But we can get to that later.
I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from with respect to this England 2012 team. Because, look, even if Bazball exists, they were the last team to win in India, so I think they are remembered for that. And I'd be really curious to know what our listeners and viewers are thinking about this team, whether or not they could have...
Beat Australia in Australia. They, I think their biggest problem was they played South Africa at a time where they probably should have beaten South Africa at home, and they lost to them. And they lost some of their juice. But that was a legit team, even if it was just a small window.
Absolutely. So let us know in the comments about your thoughts on England 2012 and how they would fare. But I think I'm kind of siding with Jarrod on this one. Pound for pound, India would still win that series. So out of the three teams that we've discussed thus far who have beaten India in this millennium in India, Australia probably fares best. And now we are going to go back over 100 years. And this is a team which Jarrod and I have at least discussed like 5 times on different podcasts. It is South Africa, 1905-06. Lots of all-rounders. My boy, Jimmy Sinclair, right? He was in this team. And then, of course, the 4 leg spinners of the apocalypse. Quick history lesson for those of you who don't know. The inventor of the googly, or as it was known, the Bosie back in the day, was Bernard Bosanquet. And he never really mastered the delivery. but he pioneered it. And in his Middlesex playing days, he taught it to his teammate Reggie Schwartz, who was South African, who then went back home and taught his teammates in South Africa, Bert
Western
Vogler.
Province, I think, wasn't it? I think it was the Western Province guys. I think they were all from the same. I mean, they must have dominated local cricket at that point.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Schwartz basically went on and taught it to Bert Vogler, Aubrey Faulkner, and Gordon White. And then, they basically demolished England at home, even though they were matting surfaces. And like, if you read Jarrod's book, there's an entire chapter on this as well. But present day India is a different challenge because there's no matting surface, for one.
Yep.
And they are all leg spinners, right? And these Indian players do know how to play that bowling type. And
they were slow leg spinners even for that time because they didn't have to bowl fast because no one could pick their other delivery, right?
Exactly. And also, now, all of these leg spinners could bat. So this was a very deep batting lineup, but it wasn't a quality batting lineup, right? Like,
no.
Very scrappy in that regard.
Aubrey Faulkner was world class and was brilliant. It didn't make many runs in England, but smashed the ball everywhere in Australia. I think he made a big double 100 in Australia. So he was class. But yeah, I remember there's one of the tests they beat England in, their captain and their wicketkeeper batted at number, was it their wicketkeeper? I think it was their captain anyway, batted at number 11. And he went on to be a top order batter. So like they were a legit deep batting lineup, but without anything. And, you look at South Africa's history and I don't know how you manufacture a team from any other point other than the team I've come up with, because there's no other point when they can go with a really deep side with multiple spinners and long batting, right?
And the batting would be heavily reliant on Sinclair, Aubrey Faulkner, and what was that other all-rounder's name? Levelian? I have no clue.
They had a few, and they had Norse as well. So I mean, there were some guys that could hold the bat, but yeah, it's a bit weird. I think you have to, for my mind, remember we're making this up, right? We're time traveling this team. The way I thought about it was, obviously, if you brought a bunch of wrist spinners over to India now, it wouldn't work. But you have to imagine that these are a bunch of wrist spinners with a delivery that Indians don't know how to play.
True,
right? And that is very different.
Mystery spin.
No one knew how to play this ball at this stage. So much so that a decade after this team beat England, or more than a decade after, like almost 2 decades after, there was articles in English newspapers saying that the Bosey or the Wrongan or the Googly, whatever you want to call it, was ruining cricket. That's how hard it was to play at that point because people didn't know how to spot it out of the back of the hand. So I think you factor that in. But having said that, I don't think they had that. Jimmy Sinclair's a great player, but I don't think he was a good enough fast bowler. They had a couple of other decent fast bowlers. As you said before, they didn't have the batting. They'd probably be a mystery. They might cause some issues earlier in the series. Whether they win a test or not, I'm not sure. But again, I just don't think it was a strong enough team overall. And remember, brilliant side that they weren't playing a full-strength England side all the time.
That's true.
But they are, when you look at history, the team best set up to go and play India in that period from South Africa. So that shows you how hard this challenge is because there's been a lot of good South African teams. None of them match up particularly well with modern India in India.
Yeah, it is very, very fascinating. It's just that all things considered, the batting, I just don't think it would hold up versus Bumrah, Ashwin, and Jadeja in particular. I think they'd be all out for 50 or something, right? And also, if you would,
that would be like Aubrey Faulkner would like average 35 and just be frustrated with the rest of his teammates for not making any runs at all.
Yeah, and if you bring that 1905-06 South African team in a time machine to present day, then there would be a lot of other things that we would have to educate them on, just for them to kind of acclimatize to the 21st century.
Would they be allowed? Would they actually play a non-white team?
Yeah,
I never even thought of that. They wouldn't have been allowed to. I should have disqualified them.
Yeah. Anyway, so we've discussed both the South African teams, and we've obviously touched on both the teams that the other teams that defeated India in this millennium. Yep. Now, before we even get to Australia, West Indies, Pakistan, and England, it is worth mentioning that neither of us think that there are any teams in history from New Zealand and Sri Lanka, even though Sri Lanka have magnificent players like Murli and Herat, who even played together, but they weren't good in India. So maybe this Sangha-Mahela partnership wouldn't have been enough. So
let me just explain that, because I don't think I went massively deep into it. But if you look at Murali's record in India, he didn't ever have a great record. And it goes back to what I was saying before. I think him and Warren were just a little bit too slow for Indian pitches. And for Indian batters, I should say. And the other thing that I would say from that is that they didn't have a strong bowling lineup. They had Murali, right? Perhaps if you take over Murali, Harath, and Vas with the good batters, because they had Samawira, who I think is one of the best players of spinner I've ever seen. They had Dilshan to throw in the mix, Jay Saria to throw in the mix, and they had Kumar and Mahela. So they have some of the moving parts. But again, when you look at Rangana Harath's record in India, he didn't take any wickets. So that's why I didn't have Sri Lanka as a genuine contender. And with New Zealand have never had a great spinner. Vettori is their best spinner. I think Vettori is certainly a New Zealand great player. Whether he's a world-line great player, it's how you look at it. But a lot of his worth comes from his batting, right? And who's there? And they never had a spinner to match with him. Like Jeetan Patel, a very handy bowler. But if you're going with Vettori and Jeetan Patel, you're going to lose. You might have some moments, but you're going to lose.
Yeah, maybe on some occasions Ajaz Patel will pick up a 10 for, but you're still going to lose.
Yeah, but even if you have Ajaz Patel, who's the second spinner? Do you remember? Do you know who the second spinner was in the match that he took the 10 wickets?
Glenn Phillips?
It wasn't Glenn Phillips at that time.
Mitch Santner?
It was Will Summerfield.
Oh, yeah, I do.
You remember him?
Just a little.
All respect to him for making it to Test cricket. I reckon I could get through an over of him if you held a gun to my head. I reckon I could work out how to handle an over of Will Summerfield. So that was the backup spinner to Ajaz Patel. That's the reason Ajaz Patel took 10 wickets, right? Yeah. And that's New Zealand's problem. So Bracewell was a really good cricketer as well. So I looked at the 80s team because they had Capital Depth. They had the other all-rounder. They had Richard Hadley and they had Bracewell. And but I looked at the team and I was like, well, who's the second spinner in these situations? It was never strong enough from New Zealand or Sri Lanka.
Yeah. So apologies, New Zealand and Sri Lankan fans. But let's move on to some of the Australian teams of yesteryear who might have had a shot. And probably the most exciting one is Australia from 2000 and 2001. This again was a stacked Australian team. It is a team from their, golden period in Test cricket. Warne wasn't doing well in India at this point, but they did underuse Colin Miller. And they toured India at this time, right? This is the Lakshman series, the great comeback after the follow-on in India winning in Eden Gardens and the highlight reel that we've seen like 10,000 times in our lives. So Colin Miller is someone who you really like. Of course, for those of you who don't know, Funky Miller always had these wonderful hairstyles and that was part of his persona. And now he is working in some casino in Las Vegas. Last we checked. Now, he was a fast off spinner and that's why you reckon that team might have had a chance.
Yeah, I think they made a big mistake not playing him in that series all the way through. So they basically went cold on Colin Miller at this time. So for those, just to give even more details on him, he was he grew up not far from where I used to live in Melbourne, and he was a sort of a medium fast seamer. I'm trying to think of who you would compare him to, a sort of Vernon Philander, but with a bit more of an outswinger, if you know what I mean, and slower than Vernon Philander probably as well. But he would come in and he would nibble it around, and he never got much of a chance at Victoria. Victoria had so many great seam bowlers in his era. Him and David Saker both had to leave. Goes down to Tasmania and has a really good career as Tasmania's sort of secondary seaming bowling option at that point. And then he's mucking around in the nets. He played some baseball and he starts bowling like a curveball. And it jags back. And so it wasn't an off spinner in the way that anyone else had ever bowled off spin, which allowed him to bowl it really, really quickly. And it caused problems for people because it was so quick and he could get spin. He was, and this is incredible to remember, when the Alan Border medal started, he was the Test Player of the Year when McGrath, Warne, Ponting, I don't know, who else you want to throw in there? Gilchrist, Hayden, Steve Waugh were all playing.
This is also a year after Steve Waugh dropped Warne for Colin Miller, isn't it?
Did he drop it? I think he drops in for McGill, but yes, more or less, it's that whole period of time. So Colin Miller plays what, 18 Test matches? Yeah, 18. God, my memory is ridiculous. And he averages 26 in those 18 Test matches. But when you break it down a little bit more and you look at where he played, you do get a bit more of an idea of his bowling was kind of useless in Australia at times because his seam bowling wasn't Test level in Australia and his spin wasn't as useful. And they tried to use him as we've got two bowlers in one. and it never quite worked out the way that they obviously wanted it to. But you look at his record in Asia, and he played 7 test matches, and he averages 32 with 22 wickets in Asia, and did very well. He actually ended up with a really good record in Australia. But when you specifically look at the way he bowled and where he bowled very well, I think it was Pakistan that really he struggled because he didn't get anything back from the surface. When he bowled in Sri Lanka, I thought he was outstanding. And that's the reason that I'm looking at him for this particular team. And then you are upgrading a team that we already know was really good because if Laxman and Dravid hadn't have Laxman and Dravid, Australia probably win that series, right? So we know that was a good team against a good Indian side as well. So I think we have a lot of information about this particular team, and I'm just giving it just a slight tweak.
Yeah, so you think this team has a better shot at beating current India in India than 2004, right?
Yes, because Miller is such an upgrade on Horrocks. I think it's, I do think, and also you get Pete Gilchrist in that point, and I think you need Pete Gilchrist to go up against Ashwin because the end of Gilchrist's career, I don't want to say he tailed off, but he has the first half of his career, he hit everyone everywhere, and the second half of his career he really struggles. If you want to get the most out of Gilchrist, I think you need earlier Gilchrist. You also get McGrath when he's a little bit quicker. You also get Gillespie when he's a little bit quicker. So there's a few different things there that you can add.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got Colin Miller's hair, which could be a distraction as well. Pant versus Gilchrist would be box office. If only we did somehow invent a time machine, I would make sure that happens.
Pant versus Miller and Warne would be fascinating, right? Like how he goes for them. The whole thing. I think it would have been a great. It would have been a great matchup there. I don't think they win the series though.
Yeah, well, we'll come towards that in the end of which teams could actually, pull this off. But next up is Australia from 1969 to 70, and this is the last Australian team to win a Test series in India prior to 2004. The spin bowl pairing is, spin bowlers in this team are pretty decent. Ashley Mallett is there, and Jack Gleeson is also there. And for those of you who don't know, Jack Gleeson was basically the Ajantha Mendis of his day. But I mean, I'm not feeling too confident about this team, to be fair.
It's John Gleeson, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, sorry, it is. John Gleeson,
exactly. It's John Gleeson and Jack Iverson. And the annoying thing about that is I've probably missaid them both to you so many times that I've got in your head with it as well. Yeah, look, they have a mystery spinner that they are heading off to. So, but if you look at Gleeson, he played 7 tests in it, albeit the Indian plays a spin in that era, but he has an average of 31.2. I think Ashley Mallett probably was a much better bowler in Asia than he probably ever was anywhere else, which is most spinners, but it less like an Nathan Lyon and maybe more like an Ajaz Patel type of person. He really needed those sorts of surfaces, but you're just not going to beat you're just not going to beat India with that as your major spin bowling pair, I don't think. And then you have to factor in, of course, other things of, how strong. I don't think it had a great fast bowler. It had Graham McKenzie, who was a very, very serviceable, but he's not Jasprit Bumrah, right? Yeah. So I can't see how that team would have done brilliantly over there. But I wanted to mention it because I thought it was an interesting one to go back and have a look at, and because it had a mystery spinner.
Yeah, no, we definitely have consensus over there. And a better team than this one, I guess, was Australia 1950 to 51. And that's the team which had John Iverson, is it? Or is it Jack Iverson?
I love what
Jack
you did
Iverson. There. Yeah, he was the mystery spinner of his time. He's actually the pioneer of the carom ball. So he is the original Ajantha Mendis. And the batting in this team was also stacked, even if Bradman had retired. Keith Miller was all-rounder, who is one of 3 all-rounders in the history of Test cricket who averages more than 35 with the bat and less than 25 with the ball. The other 2 were Imran Khan and Ravindra Jadeja. And then you also had Raylin Wall as the frontline seamer, which is very, very strong, I would say. So this team might have had a shot.
Yeah, we mentioned before left-handers that had Neil Harvey, but for the book, we had a look at Neil Harvey's record versus off-spin. And it's probably one of the best records and this is pre-DRS, so it's a little bit different, but it's probably one of the best records against off-spin that any left-hander's ever had, ever. Like, it's a ridiculous record. And he was a great batter, and that was kind of in his peak as well. It's just kind of. I'm trying to remember this team. Is this the team where I couldn't quite fit Richie Benaud in?
I think so. I think this is the one because he was also new to the scene, right?
I don't think he played Test cricket in this period.
Yeah.
Also, Richie Benaud wasn't particularly good when he started Test cricket. If you could fit Jack Iverson and late Richie Benaud in, I think this team is fascinating. Did I have Alan Davidson as well? 1950, 51. I'm trying to remember back to the full lineup. It was a really good team, right? It was and the difference between Gleason and Iverson was we didn't get enough of Iverson, but we know everyone who saw both of them was like, no, Iverson was legit, and he has these massive hands. If you see the Good Areas logo with an old Frankenstein hand, that's Iverson's hand.
Also, if you want to learn more about all of these Australian spinners, there's a footmarks on it. I've forgotten the name, but we've literally covered them all in detail.
So he was. I think it's a legit team, and what I wanted to do with that really was try and find a team from nowhere and kind of manufacture it a little bit, if you know what I mean. Because Iverson only plays 5 tests, right? He disappears. Yeah. There's a brilliant Gideon Haigh book about him. And Gideon Haigh wrote the whole book because I think he went into a fish and chip shop or a corner shop and there was a picture of this hand. And he literally he goes back. And so for people like me, we all grew up knowing that Australia had this mystery spinner who no one could play, but played one series and inspired another mystery spinner afterwards. But what we don't know, I think, with that team is how it would have done in that situation. But I think that was, and there's obviously another West Indies team where I do something a little bit similar with. But I think that was a team that you can make a very, very good case of bringing everything together and saying to yourself, well, what we have here was the ingredients of the kind of team that you need to travel to India right now and be successful. Would they have been this successful isn't really the question that we're asking now. It's whether there was teams in the history that had all the different parts available to them. And as you said before, you have a team here with all-round options. They had multiple leg spinners. They had Colin McCool if they wanted to be able to do that. They had Jack Iverson available to them. They had a lot of very good batting, fast bowling. There was just a few different things that you can look at in that period, and you say to yourself, okay, they could have put some kind of a team together. Like Colin McCool, and I am mentioning him here, at least in part, Behram, because he has a cool name. He has the McCool name. But Colin McCool didn't play a lot of cricket. I think, I'm just trying to find his record here. Yeah, and he never played in Asia. But he plays 14 test matches and takes 36 wickets at 26. You could throw him in here. It's not having Richie Benaud. But there's a few different parts to this team that I thought was quite interesting that would have been good to be traveling and playing current day India.
Yeah, and you've got Jack Iverson's mystery, which would be a handful on its own. And then, there are a lot of things that are working. The all-rounders bit, a decent seam attack, and lots of good batting. But my favorite Australian team that, if I did have a time machine, I would bring this particular one back to present day India, was 1932 to 36. Of course, these are the Bradman years, and who doesn't want to see the Dawn face or square up against Jadeja, Bumrah and Ashwin, right? That on its own is so exciting. Even though, Donald Bradman never really played in Asia, but he did play quality spinners across the world on wickets that did take turn. I think that is very, very important to mention. And then when it comes to...
if you think about it, it's really interesting looking back at it. The best bowlers in the 1930s for Australia and for England were spinners, right? And so... you have to recalibrate your brain when you think about this stuff, because it's like, he never faced spin in Asia. And it's like, he faced it on wet wickets in England when it was almost impossible to bat on. He faced it on uncovered wickets. And so there is an element of that. And
it's not just that, right? It's not just Bradman. You've got a lot of spin bowling options. You've got Clary Grimmett, who was the leg spinner. And those of you who don't know who Clary Grimmett is, before Yasir Shah became the fastest, cricketer to 200 test wickets, that record belonged to Clary Grimmett for like almost a century, right?
I also think Clary Grimmett was the first bowler to 200 wickets.
Yeah, well, there you have it. And Tiger Bill O'Reilly was also a handful. One of your favorite cricketers, Chuck Fleetwood Smith, of all time, he was there. He was a left arm wrist spinner who was also quite quick, so that kind of adds up. And then
so
there was also
Tiger Bill.
Oh yeah, Tiger Bill O'Reilly was as well. And then also Bert Ironmonger was the slow left armer, and he was quite decent. So you've got 4 spinners over here, plus Donald Bradman, and I mean, this is even post-war Bradman. Oh, sorry, pre-war Bradman, right? So
peak
it's Brad.
well, I mean, not maybe peak is wrong. Maybe we never saw him in his peak because of the war, but you know, he was established right at this point. You're not just picking the young Bradman. You know, I'm thinking about this as an analyst and a person who's occasionally done team selection. It's like Grimmett may not get in this side, and Grimmett was the best bowler in the world, right?
Yeah.
And I think that tells you how strong the spin options that Australia had. We never saw the best of Chuck Fleetwood-Smith in Test matches, and of course he has those figures of whatever it is, 1 for 287 when he gave up in the middle of a game. He was an interesting chap, and you know, bowled full tosses on purpose when he got bored sometimes to see how far people could hit him. But yeah, so I do think there is an element very much within this of you've got to get past Bradman. And Bradman isn't the only batter. They've got the 2 Bills are playing for them. Stan McCabe's playing for them. So they've got a lot of batting available to them. And then they have this incredible 4 spinners to pick from. And all those 4 spinners we just mentioned are completely different. So even though you've got 2 leg spinners, one is just, you know, more like a Shane Warne type leg spinner in Clary Grimmett. And the other one's more like a Shahid Afridi type leg spinner, maybe even an Anil Kumble type leg spinner, a Rashid Khan. So even the 2 leg spinners are nothing like each other. That's why they could play them both in the same team together in those days. It's a really, really good side. It doesn't have a fast bowler. And I don't think it has a great all-rounder from my memory. I'd have to go back and have a look. So it's not perfect. But if you're talking about the biggest problem that you have when you go to India, is really the fact that you can't compete with their spinners.
Yeah.
That is 4 spinners that do compete with Kuldeep, Akshar, Ashwin, Jadeja. They legitimately compete with them. Clary Grimmett was thought to be the best bowler in the world until Tiger Bill O'Reilly took over as the best bowler in the world. Tiger Bill O'Reilly said that Chuck Fleetwood-Smith's natural talent was way higher than his was. And Bert Ironmonger never got hit off the square, right? Like, you know, and we don't know what these guys would have done in Asia, and we don't know how they would have gone in these kinds of conditions and everything else. But we can tell from the kinds of bowlers they are, probably should have been quite good in these conditions. So,
and I mean, I don't think we've ever had a spin bowling quartet with better names, right? Tiger Bill O'Reilly, Chuck Fleetwood-Smith, Clary Grimmett, Bert Ironmonger. That could have been like a poster, you know, for the touring Australian team. Just those 4 guys.
Do you want to? I had a teacher who fucking hated me. And his name was Bert, and I always called him the Ironmonger. And he's a cricket fan as well. And he absolutely hated me, but he loved the fact that at least if I was going to call him a shit name, it was going to be, do you know what I mean? Like one that he knew, understood. So yeah, look, I will go back to the fact that I worry about the seam bowling of this team. I'm just it up again. There's a guy called Laurie Nash I would have loved to have taken to India, but Laurie Nash basically got booted out of cricket for being too violent. Ended up being an Aussie rules footballer. And they had a guy called Tim Wall. He was quite a cricketer. They didn't have an all-rounder, so that's one thing that I think is a caveat on that team. But Bradman is 2 batters in 1.
Yeah, basically.
The other thing about that is they would have taken a specialist wicketkeeper in that era. So, you know, slightly different team dynamics from that point of view.
If you make any content, Minvo Pro is the tool for you. Take your long format content and cut it and slice it for social media. This AI-inspired weapon will turn your one piece of work into so many clips. Try Minvo.pro now.
No, and I really, really like this team. And we'll come back to this in the end. I think we'll do like top 3 teams for both myself and Jarrod, who we think would fare best. But let's come to some Pakistan teams now. And 1987 was a brilliant Pakistan team. Not only did that team defeat India in India, but they also won in England, right? And Imran Khan, of course, was the captain, and he was inspiring young cricket enthusiasts all across the globe. There was also Wasim Akram, who was, you know, bowling super well. But those aren't the guys who won the test match for Pakistan in Bangalore. Neither was it Abdul Qadir, even though Qadir is a part of this team, right?
I think Carter was dropped for the test they won, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so. Because Tawseef Ahmed and Iqbal Qasim were the spinners that, got them that win. But this is also a team that has Javed Miandad, who in his era was probably top 3 batters in the world, right? So
and specifically a great player of spin, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it has a fantastic record versus India as well. Now, of course, those Indian teams were far different to the one we have right now.
Yep.
I feel like, the spin bowling might just not be fully equipped, but overall, it's a really solid team.
Yeah, I love the all-rounder. I love the left arm pace bowler, who's bowling reverse swing, and India is still trying to learn how to play reverse swing at that point. So again, we have to factor that in when we're thinking about all this sort of stuff. But
Ramiz Raja was also doing well in that particular year.
Yeah, I mean, the batting is a bit thin, I think, if we're being honest. But and that is an issue here. But realistically, when it comes down to it, I've watched those guys bowl. I think they were really, really good bowlers. They're not better than Ashwin and Jadeja again, though. Like they're just not. And you'd be lying if you would suggest otherwise, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are better Pakistan teams that we're going to talk about. 1999 is an extremely interesting one. Now, unfortunately, when the team toured in 99, the third test was a part of the Asian Test Championship. So Pakistan ended up winning 2 and losing 1 in Delhi. They won in, Chennai and Eden Gardens. But they lost Delhi, and then one of those tests wasn't counted because it was part of the Asian Test Championship. But that was a historic, tour because Pakistan hadn't toured India in 10 years. The spinners were amazing. Saqlain Mushtaq Ahmed, Shahid Afridi. Then you've got a fast bowling trio who didn't play a lot in tandem, but in that series they did. Wasim, Waqar and Shoaib. And then you've got all-rounders in Azhar Mahmood and Abdul Razak. Saeed Anwar, Inzi, Mohammad Yusuf. That's your batting, right? This might just be the strongest Pakistan team on paper that we've ever had. And I feel like they have a very good shot to defeat India in India today if we kind of bring them back over here in a time machine. Not the current guys, not the oldies.
Yeah, they would struggle if you brought Shoaib back off his long run now. No, I think that's a really interesting side, and I had it rated really, really highly. Mushtaq Ahmed hilariously never took any wickets in Asia, and so that worried me a little bit because I think Shahid Afridi is a really good bowler, but do I want him to be my second spinner in this situation? I probably don't. I want him to be my third spinner. So that was my biggest issue with that team, just from a pure spin situation. But yeah, they could bat really deep if they wanted to. They could be a little bit flexible with their lineup. They could mix and match their seamers, and they had Syed Anwar, who we know struggled with Murali a little bit, or certainly talked about struggling with Murali. Then you had Moyo and you had Inzi, right?
Yeah. Moyo, of course, was young at this point, but Inzi was, he was a proper bat.
Yeah. So that's 3 pretty good batters. The rest of the lineup's a bit more patchy with the batting, but it does bat deeper. And if you want to use your all-rounders with Afridi and either Azhar Mahmood or Abdul Razak, whichever one, probably Abdul Razak, I would have thought maybe.
At that point,
actually, maybe either of them. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, maybe either of them. I'm maybe being a bit unfair there, but
Razak was really quick back in that day, 99-ish.
Yeah, but I was thinking that Azhar Mahmood was better with his wrist, so I don't. You just pick whichever one you want, right? And then you have Afridi bowling, you have Saqlain Mushtaq bowling, and you pick 2 of the 3 seamers at any other time. It's a really good side, right? Like I think that's one of the better sides that I found in the whole system.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would also rank it very, very high. There is one more Pakistan team which unfortunately never got to play in India. It's the Miss You team, right? Of the mid 2010s that were. Like number 1 in the world for a week. And of course, you had Misbah and Yunus, who were the backbone of the batting. But this is a period where Asad Shafiq and Azhar Ali were also doing really, really well. So you got to count those guys. And, Sarfaraz was doing a very decent job as wicketkeeper at that point, far better than his predecessors in Kamran
Yasir Shah's in his record-breaking period, right?
That's the one caveat I have, right? Yasir Shah is in his record-breaking period, and then you've got Saeed Ajmal as well, who was unplayable on any surface. But those careers don't overlap. So if
They
you
do not
were to
overlap.
bring that team back in a time machine, you would either get one, or we would either get Yasir or Saeed Ajmal. You can't have both. And if you would have both, that's when I would give them a shot against current India. Had they played in India in those years, I reckon they were probably good enough to maybe, nick away a test or even a series at that particular time. But I feel like this Indian team is stronger. And, the fast bowling held up. You had left armers everywhere. Junaid, Wahab, Amir, Rahat Ali. So many left-handed pacers.
Yeah, I don't mind this team, but I think you're right. I think all things considered, I was kind of cheating a little bit because they were both available. Yeah. I think this is the team we missed. This is the team I would have loved to have played India. And who knows, as you said, especially as this team wasn't as fully, the Indian team wasn't as fully formed at that point. So I think it would have been quite interesting from that point of view. But yeah, when it comes down to it, I just think I just don't see how it goes well for them in that situation if they were to play them now.
Yeah.
But peak Saeed Ajmal and peak Yasir Shah together would have been great. I'm not sure on what you have. Maybe Muhammad Amir and Wahab Riaz as your seamers, perhaps.
I mean, there were some really dodgy seamers as well in Imran Khan Senior and a few of those other guys who. Yeah, of course. But that UAE team was heavily reliant on Ajmal and Yasir, and those were two different periods in the UAE, right?
We're missing Abdur Rahman.
Yeah. He was pretty good. He was quick too. So
yeah, so I mean that's why I think Abdur Rahman I actually think would have been a really, really good bowler in India.
So the team that you're thinking of now is the one that swept England, which had both Ajmal and Abdur Rahman in killer form, right? Yeah. Even though I feel like Yasir would be really successful in India. He was that kind of bowler.
Yeah, that's because they have the three spinners. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not as happy with the seam.
Yeah.
And you don't have an all-rounder. So I still think, and as you said, they might have actually gone very well in a series against the older India. Yes. I think if they were playing the current India specifically, I just don't think they would have a hope.
Yeah, I mean, we've been robbed of 2 test series at least, one with the Ajmal team and one with the Yasir Shah team that could have toured India and maybe could have caused some waves, but unfortunately, politics. But I think like out of all the Pakistan teams, the 99-1 definitely stands out. If those careers had overlapped, Ajmal and Yasir, then we could have cheated a bit more, but unfortunately, that's not the case. All right, we can obviously not discuss the West Indies. They were just that dominant. And if you go to 83, 84, that team had some of the best fast bowlers of any era, but they didn't have any spinners. And that is an issue.
They're not winning now. I had this conversation with someone the other day about, I think it was about the West Indies or one of the other teams, and they were like, yeah, but Malcolm Marshall, and I was like, it doesn't matter. They would just put out rank turners, and those guys can still be really good. They're not going to take wickets at a better average than Ashwin and Jadeja on the same wickets, right? You can't do anything. And I think it was Larry Gomes took 2 wickets with spin, and Viv Richards took 1. Oh no, Roger Harper might have taken 1. Like, I'm sorry, you're not winning a Test series if Larry Gomes is taking 2 of your wickets.
Yeah, no, I agree. And if you go a little back, to 1966-67, West Indies had Lance Gibbs, but he didn't really have support. So he's on his own. The one that's really interesting is West Indies 1960, because this has Lance Gibbs and then Garfield Sobers is around. So he's providing you heaps of value with the bat, and he can bowl slow left arm, orthodox spin. And if he feels like it, if he feels like it, he can bowl other types of bowling, as well. He can bowl seam up, wrist spin, whatever. And then you've got Sunny Ramadan and Alf Valentine as well in the spin department. Fast bowling's pretty good too. Wes Hall, Roy Gilchrist, you've got the 3 Ws, Worrell, Weeks and Walcott. And then Rohan Kanhai and Conrad Hunt are there in the batting as well. This team is stacked. And honestly, like if there's one West Indian team from the past that could probably beat this India, it would be this one.
I think so. I think this is a really fascinating team. I don't think people know how good Rohan Kanhai is, for instance, because everyone else in that team is so good that Rohan Kanhai, I don't want to ruin my book, but there's some Rohan Kanhai in my book. I think he is that level of a player. And so he was thought of as being, he was an afterthought because of Sobers and all the Ws. So their batting is absolutely freaky. They have an all-rounder built in because they have Sobers. And then specifically, they have an all-rounder who can also be handy in India because he can bowl 2 different other kinds of spin if he needs to, right?
Yeah.
So you've got so many different, you've got great batting. You've got a fast bowler who should have been very good, right? Like as in Wes Hall. If they took Wes Hall and Sobers as their 2 seam bowlers, that's done for me. Sobers, you hope he gets an LBW early or, nicks off a left-hander. Nicks off Jaiswal trying to cover drive him. And then you've got Wes Hall to bowl all the crap spells later on. He'll bowl big, long spells. He's tall as hell. He's fast as hell. He's not Bumrah, but he's a very, very good option. And then, as you said, all those different spinners, right? Like Lance Gibbs was the second bowler ever to 300 test wickets. Sunny Ramadan was a very, very good spinner. And Alf Valentine was a more than fine third spinner. And in this side, he could be the fourth spinner, right? Because you have Sobers as well.
Yep.
I just started thinking about this team, and the more I looked into it, and the overlap of the players here, like Butcher plays in this period as well. Like there's also, so many.
Sorry, just to interject over here. You have Bumrah with the freak action, and they've got Roy Gilchrist.
Yeah, and look, I didn't go too much into Roy Gilchrist, but Roy Gilchrist did go to India and basically invented the beamer because he couldn't bowl bouncers anymore, so he just started bowling at people's heads. He's your good backup seamer. I don't think you need him, but you can certainly use him if required. I think that's very, very fair. So there's just so many options in that side. I think it's a fantastic side. Like if I could. I almost think that's the one that was the most interesting to me, just because Sobers makes it even more fascinating. And you've got so much great batting and bowling, and everything I talked about before was covered. If I had any issue, I think those Indian spinners were normal paced. I don't think I would have any of them down as particularly massively faster paced, although I know Sunny Ramadan could bowl a little bit quicker. Having said that, Sunny Ramadan and Lance Gibbs are of such a high quality, right, that I'm not as worried about that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not perfect, but I would love to see it tried. Like I would love to see that actually go about, and and how they manage to do it. And you look at Lance Gibbs in Asia, and he's got he took 54 wickets in 14 games at a bowling average of 14. And in the most of that's in India, right?
Yeah.
That was against great players of spin, because India had a lot of great players of spin in that era. So I reckon he holds up. I'm okay with it. Let's roll with this team. Let's go back to the 1960s, convince all these guys to come in a time machine, and let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these guys played in apartheid South Africa as well, so I think this would be an easy thing to convince them for, right? Let's go to the future, boys, and let me show you, or let us show you how cricket has completely changed, and you could still beat the best team in the world. That would basically be the pitch.
It is fair to say that we do not have many records of West Indian cricketers from that era playing against South Africans.
Yeah, well, yeah, fair enough. All right, so we've done Australia, Pakistan, and West Indies, and the last team that we need to discuss is England. The first team that comes to mind is the early 1900s team, right? 1908 to 1914, this is the Sydney Barnes team, who is very, very similar to Jasprit Bumrah in the sense that they're both kind of, like, they are seamers, but there is a case to be made whether they are spinners or not, right?
Yeah.
There is a grey area over there. And the batting is stacked. You've got Jack Hobbs, who is one of the best openers of all time. And Wilfred Rhodes is your all-rounder who bowls spin as well. So it's a strong team.
Yeah, I think you probably said the three players that stick out, though. And I think after that, I mean, those three players are three perfect players to take to India, right? So there's absolutely nothing there. The further I went in, I was like, I don't know if we can really be honest here and say that there was enough for the rest of the team to be able to do it. But again, Jack Hobbs, pre-war Jack Hobbs, I think was 60% better than top order batters in his era, right?
Wow.
So we're almost on a Bradman level with Jack Hobbs at that point. And Sid Barnes still has the best bowling average of all time of 150 wickets, right? So
I mean, Barnes versus Bumrah. Imagine the billing, right? The tickets.
And then Wilfred Rhodes. So those three players, they are incredible. It gets thinner after that. So I like that team, and I found it late in my research, and I thought to myself, maybe there's a chance. But I think all things considered, it doesn't win, and it doesn't put the pressure on them. But as you said, you have to put your mind in what that team was like. They're taking the world's best batter and the world's best bowler to India, right? Like that's a good start.
What if I flip the switch? What if I use my time machine to take current Indian team back to 1908 to 14 and have them play on uncovered surfaces versus that team? Eh?
I don't know if I want to face Ashwin or Bumrah or Jadeja on an uncovered surface.
Yeah.
Look, it depends on the wickets, obviously, because as we've talked about before, some uncovered wickets were really flat, which again, Bumrah would still find a way of doing it. It's such a different level. It's such a different kind of game that modern cricketers would struggle, but I think they would still work it out because Barnes was considered a quick. And I would assume, and I really am just assuming here, that he probably doesn't bowl much quicker than 115 to 120 kilometers an hour. So even if the ball's keeping along the ground occasionally, Kohli might miss it, but he doesn't like the ones that roll along the ground. But some of the other guys, I think, would handle it. But it's a fascinating thing. But Rhodes would be too slow, right? And to be honest, my other concern is that Rhodes was not considered a particularly fast spinner, and I wonder how he translates a little bit. But yeah, all things considered, I think this would be a fun one because you would be taking 3 perfect players for India, and then the rest of your team is a little bit more haphazard.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is one more English team, which I don't know where you dug out from, honestly, but you managed it. And this is a team which played between 1952 and 57. So it's really, really fascinating because, of course, they've got Jim Laker. And if you don't know who Jim Laker is, he's the only person to take 19 wickets in a single test match. A fast
first guy to take
spinner.
10 in an innings, wasn't he?
Yeah, first to take 10 in an innings. He's also a fast off spinner, and he could have ran riot in India today in theory, even though he never bowled there. And, you've got some other spinners over here, Tony Locke and Fred Titmus. Of course, if you've seen that episode of Stupid Cricket, you would know who Fred Titmus was. And then there's also Johnny Wardle. In the pace bowling, you've got Fred Truman, who is, or was the fast bowler of that generation. And the batting is quite stacked as well, right? Yeah. You've got, Len Hutton, Ken Barrington, Peter May, Colin Cowdrey. And the spin bowling options don't even stop there. Dennis Compton, who is, a frontline batter in this team, also bowls a bit. He could bowl left arm wrist spin. And then Frank Typhoon Tyson was express pace. So, that's pretty solid. And in all-rounders, you've got Trevor Bailey. Yep. This is a pretty solid team.
Yeah, Trevor Bailey is maybe the weakest player there. And I don't mean that he's a bad player, but I think he's maybe the one where you're just like, I wish they had one of their slightly better all-rounders at that time. But Trevor Bailey was still a really good cricketer. It's a ridiculously stacked team. Like there's no way of looking at that team and not thinking that it's incredible. And, you go back to Laker. I don't think Laker ever bowled in Asia. So we don't know how he would have gone, but we know he was legitimately thought of as a very fast spinner. And I think he would have been brilliant in those conditions. You talk about Locke and Titmus as the backup spinners. Locke could be quite handy, and obviously Titmus has a great name. I think that would have done well in the media.
Locke and Titmus could be some sort of firm today. Come buy your bicycles at Locke and Titmus.
It sounds like like the kind of beer you get that someone makes in their basement, and then you end up drinking it. And then Wardle is the interesting one here. So Wardle is someone who bowled left arm finger spin in England, got to Australia and went, this isn't going to work here. I'm going to bowl left arm wrist spin here, which gives you, again, multiple options. So the other problem I have is there's a few too many off spinners. But because of Wardle, you then get a little bit of wrist spin. And Dennis Compton probably would have bowled wrist spin if needed in this kind of situation. I mean, I think you should be thinking of Dennis Compton as maybe a Simon Katich or a Michael Bevan type bowler. In Test cricket, he just doesn't bowl all that much, right? I think he takes 25 wickets and doesn't do that, and probably only bowled when like shit was going down, right? And I don't think he ever bowled in Asia. I'm not even sure how many Test matches he played in Asia, actually. But in Asia, having someone like Dennis Compton who took, 3 or 4, 500 first-class wickets bowling left arm wrist spin or whatever it was, I think is a really handy secondary skill to have. If you have, I would probably take Laker and Wardle as my 2 main spinners. And then one of Locke and Titmus as my 3rd spinner. And then I would have Compton to be able to bowl. There's 4 options that they have available to them. Wrist spin, finger spin, spinning it in both directions, a fast finger spinner, everything else. And as you said before, Fred Truman, kind of the ideal bowler that you want to send on this kind of tour. He's a fast bowler. He's skillful. He will bowl all day. Very similar to Wes Hall, right?
And he's got a typhoon for a bowling partner, right? So
yeah, so Typhoon Tyson doesn't play that much cricket for England in the end, and in part because he was a Mark Wood type bowler in an era where they liked accurate seamers and swing bowlers and everything. But everyone suggests that, I mean, as the backup seamer, I think he's absolutely fine. And I think they have other kinds of seamers that they could use as well in that period, I'm sure, like Statham, who has an end, right? They have, I think, is it Doug Insole? No, actually, it wasn't Doug Insole. I was thinking about that. But yeah, there was someone else. There's another seamer that I've lost off my list here. But yeah, there's a couple of other bowlers that they could. Oh, Bedser was another one, right? And we haven't got to the batting. So you briefly mentioned before, Ken Barrington and Len Hutton both have very solid cases to be top 10 batters of all time. Right?
Yeah.
And then you've got a bunch of guys like May and Compton and Graveney and Cowdrey. Someone like Richardson was a very good player. Like they've got, I think Edrich played in that period too. They've got a few different guys who could do some things with the bat.
And these guys were scoring runs on uncovered wickets still, so they might have done all right.
And that's the other thing I think is worth remembering, that they scored runs in England on wickets where spinners were still dominating. And so, as we just said, Laker was set up to take wickets in England as a fast spinner. Whereas now, you don't really want a fast spinner in England at all anymore. So that's how much the conditions have changed. So what happens is after the war, most teams cover their wickets. And they cover their wickets because they don't want to lose friggin' cricket to rain, but also because it's dangerous in Australia and South Africa and New Zealand. Because when the sun hits those pitches, the ball starts pinging up at your face. In England, the pitches are just a little bit softer, and so it's not quite as dangerous as it is in Australia and South Africa. But the other thing that changes is that the other countries are just like, this is stupid. Like there's two forms of cricket that we're all playing. One is normal and one is like nuclear. And England fight to keep the wickets uncovered, which means that all of those guys, whether they ever made runs in Asia or not, and some of them obviously did play in Asia, they were playing in really, really tough conditions where quite often quicker finger spinners were dominating. So they're kind of set up perfectly to go to India. And yeah, I think I looked back on Laker. I think it was Laker that I was looking at, and I wanted Laker and Truman to overlap. And once I sort of found Laker and Truman overlapping, then I went looking at the rest of the spinners, and I was like, oh shit, they got Wardle. And you start to put it together, and you think to yourself, well, I know they're going to have batting because England, up until boycott, really, have always had great batting in that era. So I wasn't worried about the batting, and I stole myself a little Trevor Bailey, and I'm like, geez, I'm off at the races here. This is a really good team to go to India.
Yeah. I mean, when I read that, I was like, okay, he's on to something here. This might just be the team. But now, considering how we've discussed every single team that was a candidate, rather than ranking your top 3 sides to beat current India in India, I'm going to make this a bit more interesting for you. And I'm going to do this exercise, or I'll do this after you as well. It's a hypothetical situation where you have, Elon has approached you, all right? And Elon has come with a time machine saying, Jarrod, you can bring 3 teams to present-day India for Test series, but 2 of those teams need to win the Test series for you to make a profit, and if you don't make a profit, he'll kill you. So, which 3 teams would it be?
So we've got 3 series, and I need to win 2 of them.
Yes, you need to win 2 of them, and if you lose 2 of them, Elon will kill you. If you win 2 of them, then this is a thing for the future as well. We keep doing this. Time machine cricket.
That's fascinating. I think the 2 teams that are automatic for me, and the England team of 52, 57, and the West Indies team of 60. Mm-hmm. And then my 3rd team, I can take a bit of a flyer. So I am going to take Pakistan 99 over Australia 32-36 because I think they have more bowling options available to them. I think if India wanted to against 1932-36, they could actually put in green pitches. Right. And if you put green pitches in, I think you could slow them down. So even though I think 32-36 is better overall, I think it's very hard to game plan against Pakistan 99.
Yeah.
That kind of period. So I am going to go, England 52-57, West Indies 60s, and Pakistan 99 as the three teams I think are most likely to win me 2 series. I don't know if they do, but I'd give it a go.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. So when I was kind of, reading up on the piece, watching your video, I was making my notes on the side and ranking my teams, right? Because I was like, I should have my own rankings for this. And Pakistan 99 was high up there. Of course, 1960 West Indies was as well. I was really confused between this England team from 52-57 on Australia 32-36. And
so I think it's interesting we've both come up with the same 4 teams then.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I'm really tempted to bring Bradman to India. I want to sell those tickets, and I feel
you know
like
what? You're right.
I
hadn't thought about that. I mean, to be honest, though, I'm taking Pakistan to India as well, so we're still selling some tickets. But you're right. Taking Bradman would be fun.
Yeah, so I think that just for the sake of being a bit different, I will take the 32-36 team from Australia over England 1952-57. But I mean, you've painted such a solid, case for 52-57 that I think both of us should be good and we can make Elon some money and we'll be alive by the end of this exercise.
I mean, what I'm really interested in is I think we picked the 4 best teams between us, right? I'm still not sure any of these teams would beat India. Modern day India.
Yeah, it's not like, they would beat them for sure. I just feel like they are most, the
if you had to pick one,
or combination of that team is perfect.
If you had to pick one, and you only got to take one team, and it's your life on the line, forget profits, it's your life on the line, which is the team you would take?
I think I'm going West Indies.
Yeah.
I think I would trust them the most.
Yeah, I think. Oh, jeez. Yeah, I think it's out of them and England. I ranked England slightly higher, but there's not much in it. All things considered, it might be the West Indies. Actually, you might have convinced me as well, because I think I had England 1, West Indies 2, Bradman 3, and 99 Pakistan 4 on the video. But I think thinking back on it, you might be right. You might be able to convince me. Slightly better all-rounder, right? Like, it's not slightly better. Sobers is a bit of an upgrade on Bailey. And the batting is pretty similar. I would say almost the West Indies might even have them on the batting. I worry about the fact you don't have someone who is famed for being a quick spinner. That would be my only major issue with the West Indies. Whereas we know with Laker that he was specifically made for those wickets. But I think that, and maybe Laker just takes all the wickets, so we'd have to worry about it. Just 19 in each test match, and away you go. Although it was for me, I listen to a podcast called Thinking Basketball quite a lot, and they do lots of different series along this sort of line, and I've done little bits similar before. For me, this was one of the most fun videos I ever made, right? Because there is no right answers, but also you go beyond just going, this player was good and this player was bad. You're actually like, Clary Grimmett's really good. I don't think he gets in my 11. You get to that level of how you start to put the team together. And at that point, it's so fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was really excited for this Footmarks episode. And you guys should also go through the Elon Musk exercise and let us know which 3 teams you would have. Maybe we missed a team altogether. You could tell us about it in the comment section.
Sure we did.
Yeah.
It's such a hard thing to kind of search. Do you know what I mean? Like, where do you go on Stats Guru to find this answer? Like you need to know history really well, and then you need to understand spinners and all around. You need to know so many different things. There's a couple of other sides that I think are quite interesting. There's a modern England side. When was that? 2008, perhaps. They came over with, or 2006 that someone suggested. I think Sean Udell was the second spinner. I don't think that was a team, but a couple of people mentioned that to me. There was a 1970 team that we talked about before with Illingworth and Derek Underwood. There might be a Derek Underwood side I've kind of missed and I did play around with it, but I couldn't quite. Their batting slips are off a little bit at that point. But I think it'd be fascinating to be able to come up with some other teams. And I think you could then do very similar things with, the other great teams as well. Like what teams could beat the West Indies at their best? Like who would you send back to play the West Indies?
This is my Crick Picks idea, by the way. Like I'll tell you later about it, but those are 3 Crick Picks episodes, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, we encourage you to tell us in the comment section below which team we missed, or who would you pick as those 3 teams if Elon were to give you that same option. Just to kind of wrap this up, I just have one question, Jarrod. I'll make it quick. So South Africa broke Australia's run at home in 2008, right? It was the 414 chase series, which surprisingly no one picked in the most iconic away test series wins, the Crick Picks. That just went unpicked. And then Australia ended West Indies' run in that 94-95 series, which you did pick. Who do you think can break India's streak, if ever?
I think the issue is to go back to where we said before. There isn't a team really at the moment that you would say. I think based on everything we know about cricket, Australia is the team, right? If Todd Murphy goes on to be as good as Nathan Lyon, and Nathan Lyon sticks around for a while, and Matt Kuhneman can continue to bowl, and they have all these Western Australian all-rounders that gives them some flexibility, and Travis Head and those sorts of guys keep making runs, that's the team that is most likely. But it's not. I wouldn't bank on that team, right? Like I think that makes sense logically now that I've said it out loud. I suppose that the big thing that we don't know is what happens when Ashwin and Jadeja go.
That's the big one, right?
Because you just said South Africa beat Australia in 2008. Yep, they didn't beat Warner McGrath.
Yeah,
right. And so it could be as simple as the answer isn't really who beats India. It's when Ashwin and Jadeja go. And, Kuldeep gets an injury, or Kuldeep loses form, or Akshar isn't quite as good as we think he is, or people have worked out how to play him. They just have a series where they're not particularly good, right? And some team comes from nowhere and sniffs maybe a 2-test series, right? And you like when Bangladesh took all those wickets on day one, maybe they continue and they bowl them out for 150, and then then Kanpur is washed out, right? Like there is an option for that. But yeah, if you're talking about full strength India, I don't think there is a team in the world that is anywhere near being able to beat them. And so Australia is the only one I would say, because it has a few different pieces that I really like. Like I like Pat Cummins bowling in India, and a few of those different pieces. But yeah, I wouldn't be putting any money on it. Like, when it comes down to it, like the India are so good at the moment, it is hard to see them actually losing until some of this team starts to retire.
It's not even a matter of when, it's more if right now. And also, I mean, I think you've nailed it there when you've talked about that transition period, which is inevitable. It will happen whenever Ashwin and Jadeja hang their boots. But will that transition be seamless for India or not is the major question. And again, you guys should let us know when you think that will happen, if it will ever happen. But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating, predicament of how long India's home stretch or home run stretch will continue. And I mean, they are definitely the most dominant side in Test cricket in this era, particularly at home. So that kind of wraps up this podcast. Thank you to all of you who made it to the 121st minute of it. And just a quick reminder to all of you.
Can I just say, I'm pretty sure this podcast is longer than the research and the filming of the video that I did. Like, I mean, okay, I have a lot of this stuff in my head, but there were certain teams I had to find and everything, and then I had to do some fact checking. It's probably the most fact checking I ever did with a whiteboard, but it is incredible that we have gone 1 hour and 22 minutes on it. But I think that shows what a fascinating thing is, and I think that in cricket, especially content makers, I think the conversations we have with our friends are quite often better than what we've got from cricket media. And this is the kind of conversation that I would have had with my friend. I know we want to finish, but just a 10-second story at the end. We were in a hostel in Chicago in 2003 on our way to the 2003 World Cup. And at about 2 a.m, people just started banging on the wall of our dorm. And it's because we had a 3-hour conversation about what Adam Gilchrist's final average would end up at. And we went through every detail that you could possibly. But that's the kind of background that I come from. And I know it's the kind of background that you come from. That's always the sort of content that we've wanted to create here. So thank you to everyone for 1 hour and 23 minutes of this nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, it was a back and forth, right? And we both have our own thoughts and ideas. And we're, looking for certain areas where the team could do better or do poorly. So it's all really, really fascinating in that regard. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. And also just a quick reminder to you that you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. It can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of our team, whether it be written content, videos, or podcasts. We'll see you soon enough on another Footmarks episode. That is all for now. Goodbye.